You've just stepped into the Midlife Revolution Unleashed, your space to ignite possibility, redefine purpose, and embrace the power that comes with age and experience. Co-hosted by yours truly, Coach Wayne.
And I'm Coach Stacey M. Lewis. We are two seasoned coaches focused on the midlife community of color. This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement. In a world that sometimes forgets the power and the wisdom that comes with age, we are here to ignite a revolution and rewrite the narrative of this incredible journey.
So, whether you're navigating your career, growing your business, rediscovering passions, or challenging the status quo, this is your space. So, buckle up. Let's dive into the Midlife Revolution Unleashed. We made it. Hello. We are here another Tuesday with you as our friends listening to Midlife Revolution Unleashed. We welcome you. Stacey, what do you have to say about this new week?
What I have to say is I have been dealing with some vertigo, so it's been quite the spinny week, but welcome to our Midlife Revolution Unleashed listening audience. It is indeed our honor to have you here. And if you are catching us live, hey now. If not, enjoy the replay. My name is Stacey M. Lewis. I am a nonprofit executive. I'm a lover of God and his people, and I am a coach with an emphasis on midlife women. And it is always a joy to be here recording, going live with Midlife Revolution Unleashed and my beautiful, handsome, wonderful co-host, Coach Wayne.
She's talking about me, y'all. Yeah, thank you, Miss Stace. It is wonderful always every Tuesday when we get together and the energy is great. We throw it out there with the public. As you know, I'm Coach Wayne, the VIP coach. I help men 40 and up, or what we call midlife, typically kind of saunter through so that they land their best half of their life, the second half. Stacey, that brings us to an interesting show today, and you've been graceful to allow me really to feel this topic, and it's about men and their friendships. In fact, from a New York Times article that you shared with me called Where Have All My Deep Male Friendships Gone by Sam Graham Felsen, we got some ideas, and I said, Stace, this is going to make quite a show. So today, you know, there's a thing happening. A lot of men, even with people around them all the time, are going through loneliness. And we want to talk about that because it's a feeling of not measuring up, being unworthy oftentimes, and just not allowing themselves to let go and release from that man box. And today I'm going to be talking about stuff that the literature all over the place is alluding to. And that is, men are afraid today, especially men of color, Black men, of being vulnerable for some reason because it makes them look soft. And so here's one book, The Man Box, Breaking Out of the Man Box. And Tony Porter talks about it, but he's not the only one. Brother, we have a habit of not allowing ourselves to get closer to another brother because we think it makes us look soft or effeminate. And Stacey, I'll shut up after I say this, but one of the things that we have noted is that men, especially as they get older, they typically don't make friends as readily as they did in the college years. And so, like, I can speak for myself. I have maybe on one hand brothers that I can call brethrens, like article, as we say in Jamaica, friends. And these are men that I've known for the most part at least 15 years, one or two recently, but the majority of them are older than that. And it's just easier to run like that, Stacey.
Yeah, I think that there's such richness here. And if I could take a half a step back, I find the subject matter fascinating because A, it's something we don't talk about a lot. The value of friendships in the male gender, the what happens to their friendships over time, and how that impacts us as women, as people, right? Dealing with men. And I found the article so fascinating in that one thing that I never really considered was that many men say they have friends, many grown, married, maybe were married, um, maybe have children, maybe not, but really in the season of life where they say they have friends, but it turns out that they really don't. They have a spouse or a partner, and her friends have spouses, and those are his friends. And so I thought that that was such a profound thought because I'd never really looked at it that way. And for some of our listening audience, they may hear that and be like, "Yeah, we all know that." Well, sorry, I didn't know. I was quite taken aback by that reality. We see it at our family cookouts, and we go to to an event with couples, and you see that the gentlemen seem like they're cool or they're friends, but they're not really friends. And so I think that this is a really great opportunity to have a meaningful, rich conversation. We definitely want to welcome Dia and welcome Delane and everyone else in the listening room tonight, as we talk about this idea of the male friendship gap and why it matters to women.
Thank you. That's true, Stacey. I'm going to steal a glance and look over my other screen where the stats are. And it says
Mm,
only 26% of men have 6+ close friends. And which number went down since 1990 when it was 55%, right? So men are finding themselves less, let me use this word loosely, endeared to
mm,
friendships with other men.
mhm.
And 17% of us report having zero close friends.
That's a
Man,
lot.
that's a
I mean,
lonely
that's a
world.
lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot of men, a lot of people that don't have one close friend.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
lot.
Stace, one of the things and here is conjecture, but one thing that I know, we're built oftentimes to compete. And a lot of times that need to compete gets in the way of men getting together to collaborate. And, when you have a friendship, the idea is, yes, there was going to be a lot of competition, but typically you want to make sure that those rivalries are friendly. Um, I think part of the not having friends as we get older is that whole competition arena that we
Mm,
are raised to belong to and believe in. So you can trust because it's about, getting to know, like, and trust people. And in terms of longevity and duration, when you have friends over a period of time, they're tested and proven, then, there's no competition about that friend. They
mhm,
secure their space. When you meet someone else as time is going on, you may be working in business or a neighbor or just someone that shows up on the radar, another male. It's kind of like if you've seen most animals in the wild, when you have two males that are in the same pride or pot, there's usually going to be conflict, right? because of that need to push up the chest and compete. And I kind of feel like we still have some of that with us by way of our training and culture.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things we talked about, we had a full show, everybody, in the green room before this episode went live. So I will refer to one of the things we talked about. Listening to you, it just reminds me of that idea of the slow fade, right? That some of these male social norms you're talking about, like competition, the roasting each other, the throwing jabs at each other, don't necessarily foster bonding, and that it happens over time, right? The article talked about the slow fade of the male friendship that happens, like, through the college years, if that's your route, or through those early working years into marriage or a partnership, into fatherhood, into career or business building. And all of those processes or those steps add to this loss or the shift in the friendships going down. Hopefully, we don't go down to zero, Wayne. I know you're not at zero, but I'm still stuck at the 17% report having zero close friends.
Yeah, part of it too, I think, Stacey, speaks to men not wanting to appear needy. And
Mm,
I know for a fact that women will call each other and say, "Hey, girl, such is happening, get some advice,"
mm-hmm,
and ask for support, advice, and help. Brothers typically don't feel comfortable doing that. One is the vulnerability. The other thing, it makes us feel needy. So to call on a brother, especially if it's not, typically we don't call each other every week, so when you do call a brother, and as you get older too, what takes on is the form of another family that you've formed. So your friends that you had years ago are now focused probably more so on building their families, or being in another role as a father
mm-hmm.
and a spouse. And so the idea that you hanging out and calling your boy, it kind of goes down. You get together, maybe have some brewski and watch the game and a barbecue once in a while, but that's not an every night thing. There are women who have relationships where they check in on a weekly basis, or they go shopping and they do things together. And that's kind of cool in that culture. But when men do that, it looks a little off. And if you're calling your boy to say, "Hey, man, I'm feeling some kind of way," you're like, that's too raw. It looks needy. And nobody wants to hang out with a guy who is calling to
Mm,
say, "I'm bleeding." And there's another book that I want to talk about, and an author real briefly, and this is Jason Wilson. This is one of his books. I have his second one too, Battle Cry. And he talks about the comprehensive man. And the comprehensive man, I call it the holistic man, is a man who is well-rounded. So, he
mm-hmm,
has what I spoke on recently in a podcast with somebody else. He has the divine, you and I spoke about it, Stacey, the divine masculine and the divine feminine. You have to sort of intermarry both of those parts of self to be
mm-hmm.
comprehensive and whole. You have to be wholesome to be healthy, right? And again, I'm just popping all the books. My good brother here just wrote this book, Brother Paul Randolph Newell, Heal Thy Man, Healthy Man. And that's what it's all
Mm.
about. It's really all about finding your true self, but we don't want to feel exposed and naked as men. So we typically don't make friends that get too close and can see the authentic self, the half-filled self, not the whole self.
Well, I think that the challenge and really the premise of the article and part of the discussion, right, is that often leads to isolation, whether it's behind the mask or shifting priorities, the cultural norm, all of that leads to isolation. And so my first question for the women is, as a woman, what signs have I missed that the men in my life were disconnected or lonely? And for women, we have to make sure we're not always taking this personally, right? You may be lonely even if you're there. Hi, Curtis. It's good to see you in the house this evening. Um, so, what signs might we be missing? Or even as we reflect, when may we have seen a sign and not necessarily acknowledged it or attributed it to his feeling disconnected or lonely?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, this is a very controversial book, but the dude is well known. We talked about it in the green room, David Dita,
Oh,
and
yeah,
he
that was the
has the book,
controversy, y'all. That
yeah,
was a
The Way of the
controversy in the
Superior
green
Man.
room. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, controversy.
And he posits a theory. He says that men who spend too much time with their women and women who with their men spend too much time. In other words, there are very few outside friendships and relationships. You know, Audrey is my best friend, but and to be honest, these days I've been spending a lot more time alone because I work from home and she works out. But when she's home, we hang out, we do things together. I rather go to the gym with her than alone and that stuff. But there is an extreme. Men who spend too much time with their women, he says, according to this guy, this author, they take on some of the woman's femininity. Let me explain. And the women take on the masculinity. That is to say, the nurturing aspect, the so-called feminine divine of the male, which is, let's say the woman likes to, cuddle or just curl up and watch a movie and read, or when you pass, you gotta give her a kiss and you gotta tell her 100 times, I love you, you mean a lot. That's Audrey. Then men start taking on that because they have to appease, and they say happy wife, happy life, so to speak. So men start taking on those attributes and lose out. He says for men to regain their masculinity, they got to be more around men. Now, that's not to say that the men are effeminate in any way. I'm talking about the divine masculine and the divine feminine in us. So what he says is when men also and women spend time in isolation, especially when men are not taking on friends, you have to get more time in isolation and say no to a lot of the things that would allow you to be distracted from finding your inner wholesome self, your masculine energy, masculine self, if that makes sense. So I have a buddy, every year he goes on a silent retreat in the woods, and he finds his purpose renewed when he does that. So I guess to some extent, that's what this is saying, that for us to be in tap with our fullest masculinity, we either have to surround ourselves with more of the male energy, or we got to be in solitude.
Yes, so sorry that my face was so contorted during that one. That was one that Wayne and we were bantering back and forth a little bit, and I believe I don't necessarily have to agree. I did not read the book. Let me be clear about that. Because I think that there's an interesting dynamic there when you talk about that the masculine energy can be renewed either amongst other men or in solitude. That it's interesting to me, that concept, and one that we'll have to talk more about. We'll have to deep dive. Let's talk about Wayne, how loneliness shows up, or how some of this experience of lack of those types of connections, those important connections, show up.
Yeah. So, and one may say, but that's what happened when you're with the guys. But a lot of time the loneliness shows up when a man is out there and he's not connecting, because connection, irrespective of how great Chat GPT and AI is, the one thing that it doesn't do for us is give us a soul to soul connection. It does connect. I was up one night, I remember, And I told Audrey, and I tapped in to do some research, and it said, "Hello, Wayne, why are you up so late?" I was like, "I'm out of here." Uh, but
That was
that's,
too much for you.
yeah, that was too much for me. I shut down and went over to Audrey. But one of the things that is missing, and we need to have that, to be honest, is true connection at the heart level, at the soul
Mm-hmm.
level. And so sometimes, again, going back to that whole competitive sharing with men, when typically when your wife comes in and speaks to you about an issue, we talked about this before, the nurturing aspect of women allows them to process the thing. They want to just talk it through. Men typically want to set a goal and accomplish it. We have to find an end to it. That's the whole conquer and conquest and compete. We got to fix it. And so sometimes when men get together, they're able to just get to the point and fix it all. They don't want to talk it through and all that. And they need each other for that. And so when they don't have that, the process of loneliness sets in, and they will sit down sometimes, and stew, which invites drinking, which invites addictions in some other ways, right? I didn't know this, but and this may not be around the male to male connection. This may be obviously about intimacy, but a large portion of men are addicted to porn. And I mean, like, I've had few clients who spoke to me at different age levels about that. And that's another thing altogether that's happening there. A need to express, a need to rule over, a need to conquer. Because listen, in an intimate sexual relationship with your significant other, you get feedback, right? So if you are doing something that she's not in for, she's going to tell you no. Well, in pornography, men are conquering oftentimes. Men are doing what they want to do, and there's no feedback. It's just what it is. Sometimes when you have that sort of energy, and I don't mean sexual energy to pass it on to your friend, but with all that energy of being broken off and having true connections, those things are more likely to happen than, I think, when you surround yourself with genuine friends and you can speak through your issues, if that makes sense.
I think it's a great example that you use, because we're talking about how the loneliness, how the disconnection, how not having male friends can show up. And what you really just highlighted was the possibility of addiction, or acting out in ways, really clinging to a productivity, or clinging to a bad habit, identifying or over identifying with work, things that cause them to be disengaged even from the others in their life, right? It shows up in that disconnection with not just men that you may not have a friendship with, but it could show up with a disconnection, or as a disconnection or irritability with the women or the people in your life, right? That you're really acting out this experience of loneliness in ways that are unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I can certainly reflect on an experience when in a relationship, an intimate relationship, where that disconnection, right? His disconnection was apparent, and that there was no real friend that he had. I guess he was in that 17% that we referred to earlier, right? So there's no one to really talk about with, even the issues he might be having in the relationship, because he's in that 17% with the zero friends. So I just really think that this idea of understanding, for women in particular, understanding um, how loneliness can show up in men is a valuable lesson, even if you don't need it right now.
Yeah. Another book, and this is the last one I promised that I'll refer to tonight, is this book, Be the Man by Garrett White. And he says that men are always lying. Oops, I shouldn't have done that. But he says men are always lying. And let me get into how he explains that. Because we wear a mask. Curtis will appreciate this. He speaks on that on his podcast. By the way, Curtis and his wife, they're celebrating their anniversary tomorrow. Congrats, Curtis.
Happy anniversary, Curtis and bride.
And he says, Garrett White, he says, because men are so busy wearing the mask and not being true to themselves and to the rest of the world, they are lying to themselves. If you tell a lie long enough, you start believing it. And so, you know, typically when us men, when we meet each other and we say, yo, what's up, dude? Everything cool? Yeah. How you doing? I'm all right. I'm all right, is what we say to each other. Very seldomly do we get to the truth and say, well, you know, things are not looking so good. Can't meet the mortgage this month. Need you to spot me a loan. I'm having some problem in the house sexually. You know, what do you think? Men don't share those kinds of things. We are all right. And because we walk around telling ourselves that story, we got to believe it. You know, that's what happens when you lie to yourself. It's a cycle. And when we do this, Stacy, it's a lonely road because you can't share the lie. You got to hold on to it. And it gets us into a place where not only is there denial, but there's harm. And because we're not coming out fully, we wind up oftentimes with self-harm. And I think it speaks to the rise of suicide in men. I don't have the numbers, but suicide for men has shot up, and for Black men too, because we feel like we got to carry it alone, and we don't. If only we would trust enough and open up enough to tell someone, because guess what? The men who oftentimes do these acts of self-harm and suicide typically don't look like they're about to do it. They show up and they're in charge. They're running corporations. They're doing things, you know, with their family. And you think they're going to show up. They take a ride somewhere quietly and they blow their brains out. You never knew. But the lie eventually becomes such a web that they weave it. They can't get out of it. And just a shout out, if anybody knows anyone who is crying out for help or is too strong in a way that they probably have a fissure and they need some help, check in on your boy, check in on them and make sure that you're there for them.
Well said. There are definitely resources that we should all be accessing, if not for ourselves, for those that we care about. And as Curtis said, no, men don't share those things with each other. And certainly that is something that I believe we can all encourage a sense of change. Wayne, you and I also talked about in the green room some of the nuances in generations and how some of the men in younger generations, some of them, my son is 32, and they have swung a pendulum. So from that isolationism or not, or the sense of masculinity, right? The masculine armor of not being able to be their authentic, vulnerable selves. I've seen, at least within some of my son's cohort, them swing that pendulum to the point where they have a few of those trusted friends where they can be their real authentic self, where they can say that they're hurting, where they can share what they're afraid of. And I think it's such a great opportunity. You and I had a conversation a number of episodes ago about multi-generationalism, right? And how there's so much to learn from different generations. And I'm hoping that even as we age, we can still utilize opportunities to look at other generations and see how they may have been able to swing this pendulum and really rebuild or establish from a point of reconnection, not from a point of isolation.
That's powerful. And thanks for sharing and bringing that up again, Stacey. There is truly a difference, noticeable difference across generations. I think I belong to the last of the baby boomers, just at the end, the cusp. And the generation after me has a more liberated sense. Yes, and then the millennials as well, and certainly the Zers are totally open. Even to the point where gender identification is sometimes to us, the older generation, a little bit confusing. But what has happened is because of so much of the trauma that the older we are, the closer we were to it generationally, the more locked in and protective we are of that space. And so when it comes to people in our space, there is this distrust oftentimes. The walls have been leveled a lot more with time. And, listen, growing up, I didn't know how brothers in Africa were living. But today, it's easy to have great friendships with folks across the pond and across the water, because those barriers are down. And you can build more enduring relationship. You can, with more transparency, more understanding, more trust, and so forth. And it's easier for men to, then the younger generation, to share in a more authentic way their feelings and connections across the board with each other, and oftentimes don't feel as threatened as if it's taken away their manhood. So that happens, I think.
So, Wayne, talk about your TCS model, right? This idea of reconnection, right? We talked a lot about the downsides of being isolated, of men lacking friendships. Yet we certainly would never want to depart an episode on a downside note or as if there is no hope. We are all on a growth trajectory. So let's talk about that a little bit, Wayne.
Thank you,
what
Stacey.
reconnection can look like.
Stacey, you're just the perfect co-pilot. I keep drifting off. We're supposed to be going to Barbados, but if you allow me, we'll land up somewhere in Hong Kong. So you keep redirecting the rudder.
Teamwork, babe, teamwork.
Okay, I love it. So TCS model. Here's a recommendation, and it's not mine wholly, but the idea is that if you're building friendships, and you're not too late, too old to have it, and it's important. Nobody wants to spend their last years alone. Trust me.
Right.
T is talk or call once a week. I think that's weekly. I'm sorry, text.
I thought your T was texting.
It is text.
I'm always trying to keep up with Wayne.
Trying to keep up. Keep redirecting the navigating. It is texting. T for texting. Text at least once a week. And then C is call. Call is at least once a month. And S is see or connect visually once every quarter. It's a model that helps to sustain and even refresh a relationship, helps to, build a friendship. You got to feed it. Even if, I have friends, like I said, for 30 years, and we talk maybe on Father's Day, which reminds me, I got to call them this Sunday, and we talk maybe Christmas or New Year's. We forget birthdays, but when we get it, man. Nobody really gets mad about that, and it's cool, because we know we bona fide friends. But I could do a better job. And I trust me, when I haven't heard from my boys in a long, long time, I don't call them necessarily to say, yo, man, what's up? I missed you. But I do, you know,
Mhm.
and it's important, I think, if you have a system like we just talked about, send a text just to say, what's up? You saw the game once a week, make that call. Hey, how's the family? Congratulations. See your kid graduated once a month. And
Right.
at the end of a quarter, connect with your boy. Now, that may mean Zoom for a lot of people, but listen, you can probably take the drive or fly if that's necessary and do something together too.
Well, I think in this age of technology, right, we at least do have Zoom, to your point, where we can do that quarterly face to face, even if it's not in person. What I'd like about the presentation of the model is that friendships require intention, and, texting, calling, and seeing on some type of consistent basis requires intention. And it's just one way. We want to really support and encourage the normalization of friendships in men, of true, heartfelt, vulnerable friendships in men. As a woman, all I can do is encourage it. Thus, why we're having this conversation, right? We really want to, we are not meant to do this alone. I don't have a scripture, but I'm sure that there's one brewing in the back of my mind. But we really are not meant to do this alone. And this idea of so many men, such value, that they add to families, to communities, to jobs, to the business sector, of this population of people suffering because of lack of friendship, suffering in isolation, does not have to be. And so, we can look at or frame friendship as fitness, and it requires some reps, right, that you were talking about, the texting, the calling, the seeing, and it requires intention. And our hope here is that you've gleaned a little something, and even as women, we can support when we see the um, approach or the attempt even at rekindling friendships or reconnecting with men, the men in your life, reconnecting with men in a way that is healthy and strengthening and empowering.
Yeah. And Stacy, if you're a guy, you get an organization that you can belong to, participate in, do an activity. It doesn't have to be vigorous sports or whatever, but just something where you have other men around you to keep your testosterone up. But seriously speaking, it's just important, I think, that men recognize that you don't have to do this alone. And sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable if it's only your significant other that you can share with, because sometimes guys just don't want to be taken for granted. And that happens when you have a long lasting relationship or an intimate relationship. Sometimes you just want to get input from someone that has proper discernment, not a wayward man who's going to take you off the path, right? But just to have that encouragement and somebody else, especially brothers who are in pain and are alone. Brothers, listen, seriously, I'm going to look straight in the camera. You don't have to be alone. If you're in any kind of pain or anguish, you are worthy. You deserve to be here for your friends, family, or more importantly, for yourself. So reach out and get help if you need that. Stay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My words of encouragement to the women of the Midlife Revolution Unleashed audience are twofold. One, we want to be a model, but not apply pressure. It doesn't have to be our way. We want to invite dialogue, but respect the space. And as importantly, we want to be a soft landing place for men, not just our intimate partners. I have a brother, and, it reminds me that even in my conversation with him as an older sister, I still have the opportunity to be a soft landing space, somewhere where he can just be. Um, and it doesn't mean that I'm expecting him to fix anything or, make anything better, but he's just allowed to be present. And so I encourage women to make sure that they are bolstering themselves up in ways, whether it be with their friendships, their close friendships, but in ways that support them being a soft landing space for the men in their lives.
That's it. And Stacy, as always, I'm available if there is a brother out there who needs some kind of support, who needs support in terms of hold on to the fort. I'm happy to refer them out. And if they need some coaching up just to figure out to get to the next level, I'm there for that. Stacy, how can the sisters reach out to you?
Oh, I'm always available. If you are here on Facebook or LinkedIn, you know how to reach me through DM, but I can always reach through my website at thestacymlewis.com. What's going on with you, Sir Wayne?
Hey, Stace, I would say go ahead and hit the site, viptransformativeliving.com. You'll see all of my handles there, my link tree and all my handles. Just DM me or send me an email, and I'll be getting right back at you so that we can be better when I see you at the top.
Yes. I'm just going to give a moment of accountability. So as Wayne builds his community of men, of support, of encouragement, of empowerment, he'll keep you posted.
Thank you. Stacey, let's say bye to the folks for now.
God bless.
See you next week.
Have a good night. Thank you for joining us.
And there you have it, folks. This week's episode of the Midlife Revolution Unleashed. Hey, we truly appreciate your spending this time in this space with us. Join us next week at the same time as we dive into relevant topics and present solutions to spark new thinking and empower your midlife journey.
And don't forget, if you enjoyed today's episode, let us know in the comments and share it with others. And of course, remember to subscribe, share, like, hit that notification bell. You are the Midlife Revolution Unleashed. I'm Coach Stacy, and I'm cheering you on.
And I'm Coach Wayne, and I'll see you at the top.